That is such a takedown of their argument, but it's so good. Like, I really like this. Hi, I'm Josh Brahm. I'm an apologist. I co-founded Equal Rights Institute, and we try to teach people how to have productive dialogues, particularly in the abortion debate. In this series, I'm taking a look at scenes from movies or TV shows depicting two or more characters disagreeing about something and trying to take a look at how productive their dialogue is. A productive dialogue has two reasonable, thoughtful, open-minded people all working together to find truth. And so we're going to take a look at these different scenes. I know this is Hollywood. A lot of times they are looking more for the cool rhetorical moments and less so depicting a really, really great dialogue. And so we're going to look at both the things that characters are doing well or not well in a dialogue, and at the end, I will give them both a rating on a 1 out of 10 scale on how well they did at having a productive dialogue. I am continuing my series on The West Wing. It's one of my favorite shows, and it's just a show where you're going to get a lot of great examples of people debating different issues. And so let's take a look at the scene.
Hang on.
I'm saying.
Hang on. A lot of those cases.
In this report, by the way.
The report.
No, I'm saying.
We can read. We know the report. We know the report. A lot of those cases you're talking about of the gays being discharged came from voluntary statements.
And a lot of these are not voluntary statements, not by any definition given by any civilian court in this country. It is not a voluntary statement when it's given to a psychotherapist, as in the case of former Marine Corporal David Blessing. It is not a voluntary statement when it's made in a personal diary, as in the case of former West Point cadet Nicole Garrison. It is not when it's made after being asked, as in the case of Master Chief Petty Officer Diane Kelly. And it is not when it is coerced out of a service member through fear, through intimidation, through death threats, and threats of criminal prosecution, as in the case of former Air Force Major Bob Kittis, former Marine Gunnery Sergeant Kevin Keyes, and 4 sailors aboard the USS Essex.
Sam.
Okay, so they've clearly already been talking, having this argument for a while, and I'm going to assume that it probably started quieter and calmer, and by now both sides are very frustrated at each other. Both sides are raising their voice. Not ideal for a great productive dialogue. I don't want to give Sam too hard of a time here because I think he feels like the argument that these characters are making, it doesn't even feel like he feels like they're making their arguments in good faith, given all these specific examples that he has. It feels like they're just giving a line, and that is a very kind of a frustrating thing, like a talking point or whatever. That can be a really frustrating thing if you feel like the person is just spouting talking points at you. And so, and just given, the topic, like I get this is an emotional topic, and he's feeling very defensive for these different, like, real people that he is aware of who have been hurt by this policy. And so, like, my instinct is to give him a little bit of a pass, especially if the other people raise their voices first. But I'll just say both sides ought to not be raising their voices at each other. They should be taking some more time. I do think it's totally fine at an argumentation level for Sam to be refuting what they're saying with these specific examples. Now, of course, maybe they could try to argue that these specific examples are outlier cases or something like that, but it seems like a pretty rock solid case against the arguments that the other guys are making.
Take care of your guys, we'll take care of ours.
You're not taking care of your guys, Major. Your guys are out looking for jobs.
Those weren't our guys.
Yeah, so this is this is just not how productive dialogues sound. This is an argument. Like, I feel like they're kind of listening to each other, but like they're not being affected by each other's arguments, Sam's making compelling arguments, I think, here in this particular case, and the soldiers are being very dismissive. To respond to all those specific cases that Sam just made by saying, we'll take care of our guys, is so dismissive and not cool in a dialogue. What they should have done is say, okay, well, let's take a look at those cases. Or, I've not heard of those cases. That sounds bad. Let me look into them. Or, you actually don't have all the facts about those cases. Let me tell you what you don't know. All of that would be so much better than just, just waving them off and trying to, let's stop thinking about those cases that are bad for my view, kind of a thing. And now Admiral walks in, which completely changes how the military characters are feeling in the situation, because now there's this major kind of authority figure just walked in.
Oh, my God.
Attention.
Good afternoon, Sam.
Mr. Chairman.
Congressman.
How do you do, Admiral?
Good to see you again, kid. We haven't met.
Mike Satchel.
From Oregon.
Yes, sir.
Percy Fitzwallace.
It's an honor to meet you, Admiral.
I imagine it would be, yes.
Major Tate, Major Thompson, this is Chairman Fitzwallace.
They're not going to speak until I speak to them, Sam. They're pretty well trained. Stand easy, fellas.
I like this, the fact that Admiral calls them well trained, like he just complimented them. And especially given that in his head he already knows he's going to make an argument against their view. Starting off with a compliment like that, I think that's a nice gesture.
Is Danish for anybody?
Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you. We're discussing gays in the military, huh?
Yes, sir.
What do you think? I said, what do you think?
Sir, we're here to help the White House form a
I
policy.
know, I'm asking you what you think.
Sir, we're not...
He's getting them past the talking points. That's really good. He's having to push them to get past the talking points, actually share your real views. Yeah, that's good.
Think.
Sir, we're not prejudiced toward homosexuals.
You just don't want to see them serving in the armed forces.
No, sir, I don't.
Because they pose a threat to unit discipline and cohesion.
Yes, sir.
That's what I think, too. I also think the military wasn't designed to be an instrument of social change.
Yes, sir.
Problem with that is, that's what they were saying about me 50 years ago. Blacks shouldn't serve with whites. It would disrupt the unit. You know what? It did disrupt the unit. The unit got over it. The unit changed. I'm an admiral in the U.S. Navy and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Beat that with a stick.
That is such a takedown of their argument, but it's so good. Like, I really like this because he did something in the beginning that Sam did not. He demonstrated that he understands these characters' real concerns by making their argument for them. And he made their argument for them better than they probably can. Because it didn't seem like they were, I mean, who knows what happened before the scene begins, right? But at least at this point, they're not making their point that eloquently. And here comes the Admiral. You know, like, this is so much more eloquent than just, we'll take care of our guys. Stop telling us what to do. Like, he's getting in their shoes and he is explaining their view so well that they're saying, yes, that's what it is. I quote Rappaport's rules sometimes, and this is one of the 4 Rappaport's rules, is you are not allowed to make your counter argument until one of the things that you've done is you have rephrased, you've stated back the other person's view, your interlocutor's view, so well that they agree with it. Because it demonstrates, okay, you actually really understand their view. You're not about to straw man them. You might be about to make a bad counter argument, but at least you understand their view first. And it's going to make them a lot more interested in hearing what you have to say, because if you disagree with them, even though you fully understand their view, that's interesting. Why do you disagree? So that's so good. And then he takes it down. It's so good. All right, let's take a look at another scene.
Leo said you had an attack last year. Leo said you had an attack last year.
Okay, this is such an intense scene. Okay, so just for the context for you who haven't seen The West Wing, if at this point you're not wanting to watch The West Wing, I don't know what's wrong. But total spoiler alert, a big thing going on in The West Wing, and especially like seasons 2 and 3, relate to the president having hidden the fact that he has multiple sclerosis. He hid that from the public. He hid that from his staff. Only like 16 other people knew. And now Toby figures it out on his own. And they're now having this conversation. It's kind of the first time that the president has now had a conversation with one of his other staff outside of Leo about this situation. And this is going to get really tense and really uncomfortable.
Yeah. A couple of nights before the State of the Union.
Yeah.
Wasn't that also the night you saw satellite pictures of India moving on Kashmir?
Yeah.
India and Pakistan were staring each other down. Control of some nuclear weapons had been put in the field.
Yeah.
So in the middle of it, I don't know what you call it.
An episode.
You were in the Situation Room as Commander-in-Chief.
I know. I can't believe we're all still here.
Don't like that response from the president. It's dismissive. It's snarky. Toby's raising a very disturbing question about what had happened in this previous situation. I can understand that's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable for Toby, but it's going to be especially uncomfortable for the president. There is a a real implication the president did something very wrong here and potentially like really dangerous to national security. So I get the president being uncomfortable, but the president being snarky in his response, not good. I think the president should have said something like, I can understand why you'd be concerned about that. Here's why I think this was actually perfectly fine, and then just spell out his case. That would have been better.
Mr. President.
The episode was over. Leo was with me. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs was with me, as were the secretaries of State and
Did
Defense.
you receive medication?
I'm sorry?
Okay, so here I don't love Toby's response because at least one thing that the president just said is potentially really relevant. If the episode was over, should there be this much concern about this specific situation? And Toby doesn't seem to respond to that. So it's not ideal. Like Toby at this point, it feels like he's changing topics. Maybe he's not. I haven't watched this scene recently, but this feels like a change of topic. And that can be a little bit jarring in a dialogue like this and might not be the best thing.
Do you receive medication?
I get injections of beta-seron.
From whom?
From a doctor.
Yeah, the president just went from being like a fairly, I feel like, transparent to being super not, and it's super noticeable. Now he's hiding something that he knows makes his side look worse, and that's not good. That's not a good dialogue moment, and if you're Toby, you're going to want to press into that. This might be a really important part of your argument, like the evidence for you being right. You're going to want to press into that, if assuming you notice, the sleight of hand that is happening.
None of your current doctors are aware of your condition, Mr. President. Is your wife medicating you?
I think that's a good move from Toby of just stating, like, all right, here's my cards. I know that none of your other doctors know this thing. But then instead of asking an accusatory question, so that means that your wife is the one doing this, and here's the problems with that. Instead, he very quietly asks the clarification question, just in case he's wrong. Is this what is happening? I don't think Toby could have handled this part, like this micro part of the discussion, better.
I think it'd be best, while temperatures are running a little high, that you refer to my wife as Mrs. Bartlett or the First Lady.
Yes, sir.
So I don't love this. Bartlett dismissing Toby's question by saying, all right, well, I want you to call her this now. Like, in a sense, it's like it's appropriate in the sense that, okay, you're supposed to call the president and the first lady by these things. But the fact that he's not, then, it would be one thing if he had said, given that our tensions are raising, I would appreciate if you did this and this. Having said that, and then answer the question, I would feel better about that, because this feels like another attempt at dodging the question, of throwing up this distraction and focusing on exactly what words Toby's using. In this moment, I don't feel like Toby's being disrespectful, and so it's even less of an appropriate, I think, response from the president. But again, there's this power dynamic going on here, and that's just one of the things that, we can't analyze this scene perfectly as far as comparing it to our dialogues, because you're not typically having dialogues with someone who has this kind of authority position over you, and that certainly has an effect on the conversation.
What you got, Leo?
They'd like a few more minutes.
The FAA?
Yeah.
Talk me through what heightened security means.
Well, they deploy more uniformed police.
Okay, so given that Leo has walked in with this important documentation, and it might have been that he needed to make this decision, this national security decision right here, I do think here is an appropriate time to kind of take a pause and not respond to Toby's question right now. But what I would have said is, give me a minute, Toby, to figure out if I need to deal with this, and I'll come back and I'll answer your question. Something like that just indicates to Toby that he's not getting dismissed right now. It's more that the president needs to figure out that does he need to respond to this thing right now, and ask us I think this little sidebar that the president's having is perfectly appropriate given that the circumstances. It would have been great for him to just kind of explicitly tell Toby, let me get back to you, like that kind of thing.
Police and the dogs, they hand search luggage.
Discontinue.
Curbside check-in, yeah. Eliminate the first 2 rows of short-term parking.
Okay, they want a few minutes?
Yeah.
Toby's concerned that the peaceful solution I brokered in Kashmir last year was the result of a drug-induced haze.
Okay. Not cool. This is an example of rephrasing your interlocutor's argument in a really negative, straw-man-y, stupid way. He is really exaggerating here and using rhetorical language, and this not an appropriate move here, and is not going to make Toby feel more like, having this debate right now. I mean, Toby's really stubborn, and so they're going to keep on having this, but this is a really bad move from the president. Again, I get this is a tough conflict for the president to be in. I get that, but that doesn't excuse that kind of a move.
Of a drug-induced haze.
I was there with him. So was Fitz. So was Cashman, Hutchinson, Burial.
Well, that's fantastic.
Toby.
None of you were elected.
I was elected. They were appointed. Vice President was elected. He has the constitutional authority to assume my office.
Not last May. He didn't. He didn't last May when you were under general anesthesia.
That's because I never signed the letter, but I don't think I got shot because I got MS.
No, I don't think you did either, sir. I meant that during a night of extreme chaos and fear, when we didn't yet know if we'd been the victims of domestic or foreign terrorism, or even an act of war, there was uncertainty as to who was giving the national security orders, and it was because you never signed a letter.
Okay, so there's something good that Toby did at the beginning of that I want to point out. He did a thing, and we teach this in the Equip for Life course. It's an apologetics dialogue tips course. I'll link to it in the description below. But he did a thing that we talk about where you tell them what you're not saying and tell them what you're saying, because people can misunderstand each other all the time. And so even knowing ahead of time what kinds of phrases or arguments can be easily misunderstood by the person you're talking to, and then just getting in front of it before the straw man can even happen, just kind of getting ahead of that and kind of saying, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying X. Instead, I'm saying Y. And that's what Toby does here. He got totally strawmanned, as if he was making a stupid argument. And Toby says, I'm not saying that. I agree with you about that. What I'm saying instead is this other thing. That's a really good moment. He's starting to raise his voice at the end here. Given the circumstances, I feel like it's pretty called for. The president is already very much raising his voice and being really dismissive and trying to avoid the argument. And so I think Toby kind of putting his foot down and being heard. I'm not feeling very grouchy about that, even though ideally in a dialogue, everyone is, keeping their temperatures lowered.
So I'm led to wonder, given your condition and its lack of predictability, why there isn't simply a signed letter sitting in a file someplace. And the answer, of course, is that if there was a signed letter sitting in a file someplace, somebody would ask why. The commander-in-chief had just been attacked. He was under a general anesthetic. A fugitive was at large. The manhunt included every federal, state, and local law enforcement agency. The Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware National Guard units were federalized.
Okay, so here, this is not helpful. Notice how much he's raising his voice and his tone of voice is getting more aggressive and accusatory. That's definitely not helpful. At this point, I'm willing to give it no. Drop it down. I do think the thing like he does, given how dismissive the president is being, of just kind of saying, one would wonder why there wasn't this solution. And of course that solution wouldn't work, because it's like he's kind of fast forwarded the conversation a little bit and just being really clear with, here's what I'm thinking about. And I can even answer my own question. Of course that solution wouldn't work. And therein lies the problem. I think it's kind of a good, he's getting his cards down, stating here's specifically the concern. I think that's good, but I wish that he wasn't being so aggressive, because given where the president already is, the president is already really defensive. This is not going to help drop the president's defenses. And maybe Toby just doesn't care about that in this situation.
The KH-10s showed Republican Guard movement in southern Iraq. And 12 hours earlier, an F-117 was shot down in the no-fly, and the vice president's authority was murky at best. The national security advisor and the secretary of state didn't know who they were taking their orders from. I wasn't in the Situation Room that night, but I'll bet all the money in my pockets against all the money in your pockets that it was Leo
who no one elected.
For 90 minutes that night, there was a coup d'etat in this country.
Okay. So Toby has just done this kind of series of arguments. He's lowered his voice a little bit at the end, but it's still very, very accusatory. And again, like, I have a little bit of a hard time being too hard on him because given the context, like, this is a really, really big deal at a huge level. And so I don't want to be too nitpicky, especially given the way the president has conducted himself in this dialogue. But now he's really put all of his cards on the table on this argument. And there's this pregnant pause. And how is the president going to respond? Here's how I would want the president to respond. I would want him to say, you're right. I get the concern. Here's why we did it this way. And here's why I think it was appropriate. Or, like find the common ground and then state his view. That would be great. Unfortunately, that's not what he does next.
And the walls came tumbling down. I feel fine, by the way. Thanks for asking.
Sir.
No, Leah. Toby's concern for my health is moving me in ways.
Mr. President.
Yeah!
I really don't like this moment. The president has completely, it's a total dodge. He's turned this into, how dare you have made arguments against this thing that I did without first asking how I'm feeling. And there are other characters you'll see if you haven't watched the show, you've got to watch the show. It's on Netflix. Come on. It's a really optimistic portrayal of how politics should look. It's probably not that realistic, but it's you might not agree with all the politics on it. It's worth watching and it's so well written. And there are other characters that react to this information differently, and it's interesting to watch that. And some of them do respond by instantly kind of being more concerned for their friend's health or whatever. But Toby has made a really important point, or he's asking really important questions. And for the president to dodge it by turning into a how dare you not have asked me how I'm feeling first kind of a thing, and yelling at him, either shut up or stop. I don't remember. It's an interesting acting moment, but it's one of those two. And throwing something or whatever. This is now a completely, this conversation is effectively over. There might be some yelling that happens at this point, but nothing more productive is going to happen. And if you're Toby, you're feeling completely put down and how dare you and made to feel guilty. And I don't really think you should be feeling too guilty at this point.
Your indignation would be a lot more interesting to me if it weren't quite so covered in crap.
Sir.
Yeah.
Mr. Garrett.
Thanks. Are you pissed because I didn't say anything, or are you pissed because there were 15 people who knew before you did? I feel fine, by the way. Thanks for asking.
That one question he asked, I think, is an okay question to ask. It would have been better asked a very different way. But I think there was a way to ask. Sometimes people can have very cloudy motivations, and we're emotional creatures. We're emotionally messy creatures. And I'm saying something like if the president had, before he said, and the walls came tumbling down, if he had said, I will answer that question, but first I want to ask you something. You are feeling very, very upset right now, and I'm wondering, are you upset because of exactly what you're saying? Or is it possible that you are feeling upset because 16 other people knew before you did? I think that's an okay question to ask, but the way that it's being asked here amid all of this kind of emotional distraction stuff, I just don't think is helpful to them productively trying to work through this problem.
Take the call in here. We'll step outside for a minute.
Yeah. totally appropriate move for Leo to like, all right, let's call it. Let's call time on this. This is no longer a good dialogue. Let's end it. Let's separate. Let's take some time. Totally appropriate. All right. So to rate them, I would rate the president at a, oh man, like a 1? Is it a 1? Could it have been worse? Couldn't have been a whole lot worse. I'll give him a 2. I'll give him a 2. I'll give Toby 5. And Leo doesn't get a rating. He didn't say enough. All right. That's this episode. Post in the comments what scenes from movies and TV shows you would like me to respond to. It is extra helpful to me if you know, like if it's a TV show, the episode number, like the season number, the episode number, and maybe some kind of a description of who's talking so we can hunt down those scenes and add them to the list. Thanks so much for watching, and go have good, productive, and important dialogues.